2, 3, 4. It works. It actually works. It's IT and the microphone, but the microphone works. My name is Mikael Nyström. Everybody calls me Mike, or the bunny. Cover that later. This session is 60 minutes about Hyper-V and what's new in Hyper-V. We are going to cover other things as well. Things like related items, cluster, compute, storage, networking, because it's not really about Hyper-V anymore, it's about the entire platform. There's two ways of running Hyper-V. You can either run it in what we call a traditional or Amish way. Like, I have virtualized, whoa. Or you can run it as a private cloud, which it is designed for. So we need to cover other items as well. Now, this is me, and you're, of course, free to reach out. It's not really hard to find me. The only one that really have a hard time finding me is my ex-wife. And there's reasons for that. It's so hard to get a find of you. Yes, I know. But otherwise, you can find me on email or Twitter or even Facebook or my blog. So this is not the final release of Hyper-V, since Windows Server, whatever version it's going to be named next time, isn't released. And therefore, things that we will cover during this 60 minutes might change in the release. I don't work for Microsoft. I can only tell you this is what they have done so far. Is there any new version of Hyper-V? I can't tell you that either, because I have an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, meaning I don't have the same amount of lawyers to fight Microsoft if I say something dumb. But one of the things they started doing, and this is really nice, it's that they are bumping up the VDI solution for Hyper-V. That means that they now support OpenGL 4.4 and OpenCL 1.1. And that's nice, because that means we can run better applications in a remote desktop environment or a VDI environment that requires that, for instance, CAD-CAM systems and things like that. One of the problems they had was that even if you didn't need those features, you still need a lot of RAM, video RAM, that is. You can't really run Photoshop in a VDI environment, because it's going to say, well, you don't have enough video RAM. And you need to have that, otherwise the application doesn't start correctly. Now they're bumping up that to 1 + 1 gig of RAM instead of 256K, megabyte, that was the last one. You can also shift monitors and resolutions individually from each other. You couldn't do that before either. So VDI is bumping up to broader the possibility to have customers running it, actually. They also implement something called rolling cluster upgrades, and this is actually very, very important. Today, that is not possible. You can't have multiple versions of a cluster running at the same time. You can't have multiple versions of Windows in the same cluster. That means that the only way to upgrade a Hyper-V cluster or a storage cluster is to build a new one. Well, you only have 5 nodes. Yes, you need to buy new. I don't want to buy anything new. Well, you can steal it, but it's not legal. It's not going to be a valid answer. What you can do now is that you can, if you choose so, add a vNext node in a 2012 R2 cluster. And that's going to shift it into a mixed mode. Yes, they are implementing mixed mode in clusters as well. We all remember the Active Directory mixed mode. I'm just waiting for So this is mixed mode, yes. What happens when you have a vNext next version? Is that going to be super mixed, very mixed, or other mixed, or I don't know. But they have that. And that's really good. That works for storage as well as for compute, which is nice. It does also support rollback. So if you do add a node, and it didn't went the way you expected it to do, you can evict that node. The VMs is not affected. They will not be affected until you actually upgrade every node in the cluster. And then you still need to do something. You need to upgrade the configuration. We're going to cover that later on, which is kind of nice. So the question is, does this work for Windows Server 2012 R2 to vNext? The answer is yes. So the question is, of course, does it work from Windows Server 2012 to vNext? And the answer is currently no. But I know they have a lot of feedback on that, so people are requesting that, but currently that is not supported. Might be if you fill out the form and say, I really need this, but so far, that's not going to happen. One thing that you do have an issue with is that when you do this, as soon as the new node touches the drives, it's going to automatically upgrade the file system. That's not a big issue unless you do data deduplication, because the algorithm for data deduplication has changed. So you move the drive to the new node, and everything works perfectly fine, and then you move it back, and there's no file system anymore, and that's kind of annoying. So as long as you don't do data deduplication, that's fine. Now, data deduplication in this scenario is not supported unless you do VDI. So it shouldn't be a big problem, but just as you know that. There's a cluster update feature, and that doesn't either work. You need to upgrade all the nodes for CAU to work. So the mixed mode thing, you shouldn't run it more time than you actually need to. When you start doing the migration, finish it, right? Don't do the, oh, I'm going to do the last node in next summer maybe. That's just bad. Don't. No. When you have upgraded all the nodes, it's still running in a mixed mode. There's a PowerShell command called update cluster functional level, which bumps it up. When you've done that, there's no turning back. This cluster is now upgraded. You can't add a 2012 R2 node to it. It's impossible. So that's the final step. Don't miss it. In Hyper-V, they do a lot of things. Actually, a lot of things. It's just small things, but it's things that you should be aware of. One of the things is storage quality of service. That has changed. The VM configuration has changed. They're now implementing production, and I like this, production checkpoints. So what did we have before production checkpoints? Non-production checkpoints? Yeah, kind of. They changed the authentication in Hyper-V Manager, which is nice. They changed the behavior and the method we manage the images using integration services, and they changed backup. Now, the change in backup is a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, as everything else. There's a new architecture. One of the problems they have with backup is that every backup system we have for Hyper-V is block-based. And we just want to do the blocks that has changed. Therefore, everyone needs to create a filter to figure out what blocks actually did change. And today, every vendor creates their own filter driver. Now, I have respect for developers, but sometimes they are just human, and they make mistakes. And one of the biggest issues for Hyper-V so far is badly written filter for backup. And the problem with that is that if that kind of software is badly written, it blows up the entire system. That's one of the blue screen things. They are removing the need of that. They are removing that so that every vendor now have the ability to use the built-in filter driver to figure out which blocks have been changed. Remember the ability to. It doesn't mean they prohibit third-party vendors to create their own filter drivers, but they are strongly encourage them not to do that anymore. That means that the first generation of backup that is most likely supported for vNext is going to use the old filter driver method. So whomever is your vendor for backup, you should communicate with them and tell them that we really like you to use the built-in feature now, or I can find you because I know where you live. And I have friends driving a motorcycle. They also know where you live. So just change the code so you use the built-in driver, which is nice. Yeah, that's a tracking thing. Another thing they changed is that they are shifting the format for configuration. They used to be a binary format, and then they changed it into XML, which is really nice because you can open the XML file and modify it. Here's a crashed VM. It doesn't work. Well, you can rebuild the configuration. Then in vNext, you can't do that anymore because they're shifting back to the binary format. There are opinions about this, but it really doesn't matter what we think. They assume that this is better. They have better logging, blah, 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 reason, whatever. It's like, yeah, okay. So, but they are doing this. But it doesn't happen automatically. So here's a bunch of machines I have. And if we zoom in here, you can see that this one is running version 6.0 as configuration. It is a generation 2 machine, UEFI-based, and it's actually created on a vNext machine. But if I go to another machine here, and do the same thing, you can see that's a version number 5. That machine was created in Windows Server 2012 R2, and it hasn't been upgraded. So that is still running the XML file configuration. And this is good and bad. The good thing, you can move machines from 2012 R2 into vNext and back again. They never changed the configuration. That couldn't be done between 2012 and R2, because if you move a VM from 2012 to R2, you can never move it back. So, but they need to have this, otherwise the cluster rolling thing doesn't work, right? So they don't automatically change this configuration. So if they don't change the configuration, someone needs to do that. And we're going to cover that later on. Production checkpoints. This is, I was like, what? Okay, so this is what happens when you do a backup today. It's actually doing a snapshot of the system, which is nice, but it doesn't guarantee consistency inside the operating system. With production snapshots, they kick the VSS engine inside the virtual machine and force it to perform a backup, meaning that a snapshot is, from a VM perspective, now a real backup, meaning when you restore that, it's actually a system restore. That guarantees consistency. And you can, of course, see that. Not here, but here. We go into settings. Big truck. I can't do it on that machine, but I can do it on this machine, maybe. Settings. Checkpoints. It says enable checkpoints, production checkpoints, create standard checkpoints if it's not possible to create a production checkpoint. So that's the default settings nowadays, which is good. It should be like this. But it also requires that the VSS engine inside actually supports this. But in this case, it's going to be this. Let's try to do it the real way. If it didn't work, let's shift over to the old way instead. So that's kind of fine. Now here's the problem. Since we support the ability, or they support the ability to move back and forth, there is no automatically upgrading. That was the scenario in the old version. But for the new version, it's a manual upgrade of each PC or VM. The machine needs to be disabled or turned off, powered off, dead. Can't be running while you do this. So that's something you also need to plan for. So let's assume the scenario of a cluster, and you do the rolling upgrade, all the VMs are running, everything is smooth, you upgrade the cluster, everything is cool and dandy, and you want to upgrade a VM configuration. Then you need to schedule a time where you can turn off every machine. So you need to ask yourself, do I really need to upgrade the configuration? Or can I run it as an old configuration? and just focus on whenever we create new machines, they will have the new configuration. There are some benefits of running with the new configuration, but most of them applies only when you run vNext as the virtual machine. They don't really apply currently to older operating system anyway. So yes, we have done upgrades just to see that it works and things like that, but it's not super important to do it. In the long run, these machines are going to be dead anyway because they're going to live for 3 years and they're going to throw them out. You're going to see the version if you do a get VM, name, select, version, and then you're going to see what version you have. And version 5 is 2012 R2, and 6 is vNext. So let's do that. So I'm going to start with importing a virtual machine, which I have here somewhere. Maybe I have it here. Yay, I have it here. And this is an old machine. It's actually very old. You know how old it is? It's really old. So that means that when you come to the discussion about which one was first, VMware or Hyper-V, I think Hyper-V was, they started out really early, like in the 16th century or something like that, which is nice. So let's fire it up. It's actually going to be refreshed, so the date will be fixed later on. I think it's one of those bugs that, should I really fill out the form at Microsoft Connect and say it's a bug? No, they're going to figure it out anyway. It's going to be fixed, eventually. So it's running on a new machine because it was running on another machine as before. So it's going to do the getting devices ready. It's going to power up. Everything's going to be good and nice. And it's going to be running on configuration number 5. And I'm so glad I have SSD drives and not mechanical drives. Anybody tried switching from SSD drives back to mechanical drives and said, it's almost the same? Anybody? No, because when you shift over to SSD, it's that's one time you do that. And it's got, well, the new machine does have mechanical drives. I see. I'm not going to use it. It's not for me. Let's verify that we have network settings correctly too. Yeah, it's going to take a while. So when this machine is up and running, it's going to be pretty much like any machine. Let's move back to that machine when it has started. Other things they did. Hot add memory. Well, you can use dynamic memory, and in dynamic memory you can bump it up and bump it down, but this is different. This is actually changing or adding memory that is static. This machine has been assigned a certain amount of static memory, and you can change that on the fly. You can also add network adapters, which is also very nice. And they also implemented a new thing called device naming. Device naming means that we can create a network adapter using PowerShell and give it a name. That name will now exist inside the virtual machine. So what's the purpose of that boring feature? Well, I do a lot of automation. Anybody here that believes in automation? Yes, okay. So have you ever had a situation where you need to set a certain IP address on a certain network? And the only way to figure out which network adapter it is to use the MAC address. Try to automate that. It's one of those horrible, horrible things because, well, you create the machine and it doesn't have a MAC address. Well, so then you need to assign a MAC address. Okay, so then you need to power it on and then power it off to get the dynamic MAC address, but that's dynamic, so you want to do it as static, so then you need to have a MAC address table, and suddenly that small thing becomes a huge we need a MAC address database. We need to have 40 developers building that solution right now. It's like, oh. If you can bring the name from the host into the virtual machine, well, then you can, inside the virtual machine, say, grab the name and rename the network adapter so that it has the name of that property, which makes it easier to automate things, like the network adapter with the name Internet should be configured according to this. The network adapter connecting to internal networks should be configured as this, things like that. They also add Linux Secure Boot. I guess that's going to make some people happy. They also added a new power mode support. And I have my thoughts about that, but that's another story. And they also now require SLAT on every machine. That was a requirement for the client version of Hyper-V. That is now a requirement for every server as well. It doesn't really affect you because most of the servers you buy today do have that. But it does affect you because a lot of you have old hardware as your lab machines. And the first thing you want to do is to run this in a lab. And then you realize that none of your machines have that. So then you need to buy new hardware. And it's a budget issue, and you need to ask permissions and all that stuff. So you need to verify that the machines that you are supposed to run this, including lab machine, does really support SLAT. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Let's shift back to the machine and see if it's running. Hey, it's running. So everything works. Let's turn it off. Now it's turned off. And let's upgrade it. Let's do that. Get name, MDT, update, VM configuration version. Yes. Hooray. And everybody does that, and they are happy, and then they start the machine. And then they, oh my God, that was the domain controller. It doesn't boot. It doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. You need to run another command. This is a vNext issue. Most likely this will be solved in the final release, but the current version has this issue. You need to run the following command. You also need to change the secure boot template. Set VM firmware secure boot template Microsoft Windows. When you do that, the machine actually boots. Hopefully. Yes, it boots.
They've done it again then.
Sorry?
They've done it again.
Yeah.
Same in R2.
Yes. Yeah. So the comment is that that issue was actually in the former version of Windows as well. Yeah, I think they have meetings between developers, and then they decide which issue they should bring on to the next version just for the fun of it. I'm not sure. I haven't been to any of these meetings, but it's easy. And they never try everything. It's a technical preview. And as long as you know this when you're playing around, well, then it's fine. But that shouldn't be there. There are other things as well. So let's look on the network adapter and the memory resize thing. I like the add, remove, resize memory very much because that means that you can have systems running and then you can measure the load, and instead of using dynamic memory, you can now start saying, well, you know, that machine is actually not using the memory. I'm not going to use the dynamic memory feature. I'm going to remove memory from that. Or you say, even if it consumes more memory, it's the time of the day that you're not allowed to use any. Well, then it's going to page out the disk. Well, I'm going to close down the IOPS for the disk as well. It's going to be horrible to use that system. But it's a horrible user that uses the system, so I don't care. You can't do that, but, well, you can. But don't do that. So let's check the memory stuff first. Not that one. Here we have PowerShell. And here we have change memory. So get VM name, set VM, and it's going to be memory startup bytes. So that means if you go into this machine, we just call ISAN01, you can see it's actually running. And it doesn't have dynamic memory because it has just a startup RAM. And of course, I can go into the console here and change the memory, but that's not even close to be funny. It's a console thing. I prefer this one. So let's go back, log on to the machine, and check what happens when we mess up the system. So currently we have 1 gig of RAM, and we're consuming about 86% of it. If we go back here, we select to run that. We should have 2 gigs of RAM. Or 3 maybe. Let's do 3 instead. Have you any idea how fun you can have with this? Hey, Joe, can you log on to the machine and check how much memory it has? Just monitor it for a while. Yeah, it's kind of bumping up and down. It's really strange. Now, I like 16 and now 1. 16, 1. It's something weird going on. Yeah. Troubleshooting this, checking the log files for, if you start using this, checking how much memory it has or consumption of memory or load or things like that is going to be very weird to see. It's like, it's using 89% of the memory, and suddenly it's only using 1. What happened? Well, did the application die? No, we just added a bunch of memory to that machine. So you really need to know that you're having this. Otherwise, it's going to be very strange to do some troubleshooting. We already done that. Then the fun thing is that you can remove memory. I'm removing more or less every piece of memory. Anybody here being a service provider? Isn't that really cool? If the customer doesn't pay, it's really slow. Mm-hmm. When I see the money on the bank, it's going to be really fast again. You had a question, sir?
Yeah, is this something Microsoft has implemented before VMware?
So the question is this something Microsoft has implemented before VMware? I have no idea.
Because, I don't know, does VMware have this?
So the question is, does VMware have this? I wouldn't. I'm dumb if I answer that question. I'm not a VMware guy. I do VMware, but I'm not a person. So the comment is that it would be cool if Microsoft is actually first on this one. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think they have this, but I'm not sure. They have it, right? You can't lower. You can just increase it. Yeah, yeah. They have ballooning. Yeah, that's another story. So this is kind of cool. I think at least. We started to play around with it to see what we can use it for, and so far we use it for scheduled maintenance system that we know are going to need a lot of memory during weekends to run batch jobs and things like that. Then we shift from a certain set of machines over to these machines, and then we shift it back when we shift into production. So it's kind of easy to bounce around with memory for this. Yes, and we do run this in a production-like environment, which you shouldn't, but it's kind of fun. Networking. Let's check networking. So for networking, this is what we do. And it's actually important, if you do this, you need to do it in the correct order. We've done some really dumb things with this. First time I just added the network adapter, but it doesn't mean it's going to be on the correct network, VLAN. If you use VLANs, it's going to end up in the default VLAN, which could be a bad thing, that this server ends up on the wrong network. So the first thing we do is that we add a network adapter, and we don't connect it to any switch. We just add the network adapter itself. And then we set the network adapter, and we enable device naming. That's a new PowerShell command. And you can't do this in the UI. You can only use PowerShell for it currently. You can add a network adapter, that's fine, but they all going to have the same name, network adapter. And in that case, it's like, you can add a network adapter and manually configure it, but if you want to have a correct name, you need to do it in PowerShell. Then we set the network adapter VLAN to the VLAN we're using, and then we connect it to the switch, and then I dump the information. So it's just that please add a network adapter first, configure it, and when it's done, you connect it to the switch, not directly. It's just a friendly tip here, otherwise you're going to end up in the wrong network. Okay, so let's do that. It's going to be over here, I think. Underscore demo. Yeah, there it is. And I need to do this. There we have the script called add new and vNic VM ISAN 01 nickname nicconf switch name uplink switch VLAN 2015. And before we hit that, let's go back to the VM so you can see that this is what like magicians do. Look, there is only one network adapter, and it's called Ethernet. If I go into the change adapters, you can see I have only one network adapter. Look, no hands. Which means that we should be able to run this. Did I have any other parameters? No, I didn't have that. So if we go back to the virtual machine, it has another network adapter, which you can see here. It's called Ethernet 12. But I gave it a name. Yes, you did. It's in here. Now, please don't laugh. It's just one of those things that, because I asked them about this, why did you do it this way? Well, it's device naming. You know there's a standard for device naming, right? Yes, we're using that. No, you're not. You're implementing the Microsoft version of device naming because Windows actually supports device naming. It's just that they don't use that method. Instead, they use their own method. So the only way to get the name is inside the VM. So that means that the only way to convert the name here is to have something that runs a script. And here's a script that says, get every network adapter. That has, I hate this. Get every network adapter that has a property with a Hyper-V network adapter name. For each of these, grab the display value and change the name so it matches the display value, display name value. So if we run this, yeah. Let's see if I have a keyboard that actually works. I do have that. And I need to find the script itself. So let's do a view screen, full screen, and it's located in the desktop. That means that if we do this correctly, you're now going to see that the network adapter was changed to the name I gave it, which is kind of nice. If you do have multiple networks, you can have the internet or, I don't know, internal or whatever you want to name it for, instead of having the name of Ethernet. I think this will be improved. So, but I'm just, speculating. I think this will be improved. So things like System Center Virtual Machine Manager will most likely be able to handle this, or they're going to improve the code for it. But the idea is to at least be able to change the name in a correct way, which is kind of nice. So we did that, Cool. There is no more VMware vmguest.iso anymore. The integration components doesn't exist on an ISO image. That was great, and at the same time, it could be a bad thing as well. So the question is, where is it? Well, it's located in Windows Update. So they are going to do Windows Update integration, but doesn't that mean that all the VMs do need to have an internet connection, and they need to run Windows Update? And they need to automatically do that, otherwise they won't be upgraded? Does every machine you have access to the internet? No. So you need another way to download it. So that it's going to be able to, you're going to be able to download the updated integration components on Microsoft Download as well. But how do we do it for Linux machine? Well, they're going to release it so that the Linux machine is going to be able to deploy it using the package manager. So manually download a file, install it inside the VM as usual, or use Windows Update, or use the package manager to grab all that information. I'm not sure this is great, but it's good to add the Windows Update feature, because it was horrible to deal with the ISO image and do an integration update of these components. They change, this is a small change, but at the same time a huge change. They changed the authentication model for the Hyper-V Manager console. From vNext, they're going to use WinRM instead, and remote PowerShell. They're going to use WinRM. But that also means you need to configure that. The nice thing is that you don't need to be logged on as a certain user. Instead, you can connect to that machine with the following user credentials. That also means you need to configure CredSSP, because you need to be able to store the authentication on the other machine. Anybody uses CredSSP in here? Anybody using Virtual Machine Manager? Everyone that says, I'm using Virtual Machine Manager, you're also using CredSSP. System Center Virtual Machine Manager only use and works with CredSSP currently. So they use that method today. But maybe this machine is not joined in, so you need to enable CredSSP. It is possible to do that, and I think actually I did a blog post on it. I think I did. If I haven't done it, I need to do it anyway. Did I do that? Yes, I did. Lucky me. So here's how you configure CredSSP to work. It's kind of nice. You run the script and you define these machines. I would like to be able to store the credentials on the following machines. You just specify them, and it's going to verify that you actually can do that. There's always a bunch of comments on these things. It's like, oh, it's dangerous, it's dangerous, it's dangerous. Absolutely, I agree, it's dangerous. Everything is dangerous. You can die any second. I mean, it could be like the moon can, on your head, and you're going to be dead. That's you. But we still need to be able to manage things. But you should be aware of the fact that when you're using CredSSP, you are storing your credentials on another machine. Make sure you trust that machine. If it's in your fabric, you should be able to trust them. Because if you can't trust them, well, that's really dangerous in that case. So they're shifting that, which is nice. The new console will be able to manage 2012, R2, and vNext at the same time. And that means, gentlemen, that when vNext is bumping up and it's really coming, you can change your management tools, your management server, the one that you actually log on and manage everything else on, that's going to be able to be upgraded to a vNext version pretty fast. From that, you will then be able to manage all the other systems, as long as they run 2012 or above. Oh, we still have a couple of Windows Server 2003 in our fabric. Don't have that. Anybody built a geo-replica system? Cluster, stretch, you built it? Was it fun? One part of it is that, I mean, building the Hyper-V stuff is kind of, that's reasonable, but you also need to include the storage replication feature, right? So you contact the vendor, you put up a replica. Anybody have replicated SANs in here? Anybody have nightmares every time there's a firmware upgrade to one of the SANs you have? It's like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to call someone, and he's going to do it. I'm going to stand next to it and watch. Yeah, but if it breaks, I'm going to blame him. But I'm not going to be the one. It's always scary. Now, there is a possibility in the vNext version to actually use a built-in feature in Windows. They have storage replica in Windows Server vNext, meaning you can take whatever server and replicate on a bit level, block level, from one server to another. And that's going to work. And that also works with clusters. So you can build a storage cluster and say, well, I have a storage over here, and I have a cluster, and I have storage over here. That's completely other. It's something else. Over here, it's iSCSI, and over here, it's fiber channel, right? So it's two totally different storage solutions. The cluster will do the replication in between.
Real time?
So the question was?
Real time?
Real time, yes. The question is, does it do it in real time? Yes, it's synchronized writing to both of these storage locations. But the problem is going to be latency. It needs to be below 5 milliseconds. Currently, this works, okay? This works. Don't even think of putting it in production, because it's horrible slow. The code has not been perfected yet. It's more of the, it's working, but it takes time. So we did have a customer that says, we want to try this. And I said, yes, we can absolutely try this out, no problem. And we want to do some performance measurement. No, you don't want to do that. You absolutely don't want to do that, because if you do that, you're going to be very disappointed. Yeah, but we need to see if it works. Yes, working is one thing, performance, it's another story. So this is like a horse right now. And when they are done, it's going to be something like a Ferrari. And there's a difference between 1 horsepower and the many you have in a Ferrari. I prefer the Ferrari one. If you want to do it between standalone servers, it's only PowerShell. It's rather easy to do it. There's a lot of demos around that have shown that. You can also do an asynchronous replication because you want to have a recovery site. So you're going to run on this site, but you just want to have everything over here. And in that case, the 5 millisecond limit is gone. Now it doesn't matter. Well, it still does matter. They now support connected standby. And I was like, yay? Connected standby. I tried to figure out where you actually can use this. And it's not going to be in your data center because you're not going to have a laptop with 24 cores and a terabyte of RAM. My best guess is that it's a bunch of developers around the world that actually uses the Surface Pro, and they would like to be able to slam and walk away, and they run a bunch of virtual machines, and they're going to survive. So that's nice. But in a data center? Nah. They're also changing WMI. In the WMI, what they're changing is that if you do put up a cluster, you can access the entire cluster from one point. There's one node in WMI where you can reach the entire cluster configuration. Currently, I don't know of any application that uses this. So you can use it for PowerShell, you can script against it, but eventually developers is going to use this instead of reaching to all the nodes. They just need to read this information to grab all the information, which is kind of cool. But currently, it's limited in functionality. Oh, that's the servicing. I'll talk about that later. Yeah, there's one details here. It says currently for vNext, but will apply for Windows Server 2012 R2. This is something they told me that we are going to do this for vNext. But when we've done that, and that's kind of working, we're going to do the same story for 12 R2 as well. So eventually, even if you're running old Hyper-V servers, they're also going to do the integration services through Windows Update, which is very nice. Especially when you come to the migration stuff and you're moving a lot of VMs, they're automatically going to update themselves as long as they have internet access, which I like. Secure boot for Ubuntu 14.04 and SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 12, which is nice. I talked with one of my developers and said, yeah, that's great. Fun for you. Storage. Told you about the replica thing, but there's actually something called storage spaces shared nothing. Anybody heard about storage spaces shared nothing? You see the video they recorded on TechEd? So there's one session about this, and we're not allowed to do any demos around it at all currently. But the basic idea is this. This is called PowerPaint. Today, you build 2 scale-out file servers, and most people do, and behind that they have either an iSCSI SAN or they have a fiber channel SAN, or they build storage spaces. It depends on what the customer have. This is the recommended way because this way you can expose every storage you have as SMB3. So it doesn't really matter what you have. You connect storage to storage, storage to storage, and you connect storage to storage. So we do have a customer that has a combination of SAS, iSCSI, and fiber channel, and all these 3 storage solutions goes into 2 scale-out file servers. On the other side, it's share 1, share 2, and share 3. The problem with this solution is that there's a lot of moving parts. Anybody played with SAS? SAS cabling, connectors, firmware, drivers, and you've been angry? Yes. So one of the problems they have is that even if in theory that particular firmware should work with that particular driver, it should really work, together with everything, it should really work. It doesn't. It's a third-party thing. The firmware is bad, the driver is bad, the firmware of the drive was bad, and you had a bad day, and nothing works. So we build this, and sometimes it takes like a day or two to build the entire solution, and it works perfect. And the next time you do it with different hardware and different drivers, it takes 4 weeks, and nothing works. And then you buy other hardware, and then suddenly it works. SAS signaling and cabling is really in a bad shape because vendors never really try things the way they should. I don't know why. So here's Microsoft's idea. Instead of having that, let's do it this way. Instead of having a lot of storage boxes, let's stop doing that. Let's just have a plain vanilla server. And inside the server, let's use cheap drives, like SATA drives, SATA SSD drives, and SATA storage drives. You can connect a box to this, but that's going to be a simple connection. It's just a box with a lot of drives. And then we treat all these boxes. That was incorrect. We treat all these boxes. I can't even type. I need one of those. One of these boxes is just a storage cabinet, an enclosure. It's just that the enclosure runs Windows. And then we replicate the data over the network instead.
Is this the same as vSAN for VMware?
So the question is this the same as vSAN for VMware? I hate to compare products. I think the idea is the same thing, but is it using the same technology? I don't think so, but the idea is the same thing. So this is more or less going to kill a traditional SAN, because there's no point of buying a SAN anymore.
Just a bunch of boxes, JBody?
These boxes that you see over here, that's JBods. These boxes over here are Windows Server, vNext. You connect them all to a network, and now we need to start thinking. We had a customer saying, that's really cool. How much performance can you get from it? Well, how much do you need? Well, I need 10 gigabit. Okay, so you need 10 gigabit out of it. So if we need 10 gigabit in and out of that system, we need to be able to send the data in between these servers, which is now going to be 4 times as much. So that means that these need to be connected to a 40 gig network or a 56 gig network, or the next generation 108 gig Ethernet network. So now we don't have SAS cabling, we use the Ethernet cables instead, so we need to have good performance between these machines. Now the specification on exactly how to build this isn't done yet, but this is what's coming. That means that whenever you are in the situation of buying new network equipment, maybe you should reconsider buying gigabit switches. Maybe you should start thinking of, maybe they should support RDMA. Maybe we should have Mellanox or InfiniBand or Rocky V1 or Rocky V2. Maybe we should start doing that instead, so that the next time we need to buy storage, we buy more or less plain vanilla servers and cram them with drives and replicate the storage instead. Then we don't have a SAN. The number of nodes and all that stuff is going to be updated later on. So right now, this is more of a, this is how they are going to do the storage for it. So in the big picture, it's going to look like this. You more or less have one giant network thing, and on one side of the network we have this storage, which is now just plain vanilla servers with local drives, and all of them are connected to the network. And on the other side, we have the compute nodes, which is just plain vanilla servers, which are connected to the network. So the difference between that machine has room for hard drives. This machine doesn't have room for any hard drives. That's the difference. We've seen samples and ideas of this that went and say, well, you know, let's buy the same piece of hardware. The compute node and the storage node is going to be the same piece of hardware. We're just going to have different amount of memory in them. But it's going to be the same machine, same CPU, same configuration. It's just going to be this. So then you can call whatever vendor you have and say, I want to buy 200 of these. I need 20 of them configured with this amount of memory, and the other ones with this amount of memory. You need storage? No, I don't. I'm going to buy storage wherever it's cheapest. Does it make any sense to do this? I think it does. The question is, when it's actually available for running in production at that time, what network will be the best way to do it? It's going to be InfiniBand or iWarp or Rocky V2 or whatever. That's going to be the question. What kind of hardware do we need to have to make it work? The distributed storage quality of services. Let us define in a cluster what kind of IOPS we want to reserve for certain drives. Today, we can set it on individual drives, but this way we can have it in a distributed environment, which is very nice. You can define that this is an important machine. And this is the way to not kill the storage. You should, when you are a storage provider or you run a private cloud, you should always limit the amount of IOPS any given disk should be able to steal, so it doesn't go bananas and steal everything. That happens. We've seen it. It's like, who is doing something really weird? Well, it's a developer that does a backup of a backup of a backup inside the virtual machine. Why is he doing that? Because he's a developer and they aren't ready to write. So define them, set them. If you try to do this, you're going to have an error. I think that Ben Armstrong actually have a blog post on this. You need to fix it. Well, that's easy to fix. Another thing they did is that when you do replica and you add another hard drive, then you add a hard drive, it doesn't mean it gets replicated. Well, it still doesn't mean it gets replicated, but now it's going to end up in a group called the non-replicated set. Therefore, you can always run PowerShell to see how many drives do I have in a replicated set. Do I have a VM that is assigned to be replicated? For each of those VMs, grab every drive except this drive and add it to the replicated set. So that is automatically fixed. But you need to PowerShell it to make this work. If we just look on the Hyper-V Manager console, you can see that it still looks the same way. When you create a new virtual machine, all these things are basically the same. Generation 1, Generation 2. They bumped up the memory from 512 to 1 gig of RAM. That's great. You can configure network. You have all these items as you used to have. If you go into the machine itself and do settings, it's going to look the same, except for now you have the ability to add a network adapter. The firmware looks the same. Memory is different because now you can change the memory. CPU pretty much look the same way. You have the compatibility and you have the NUMA nodes. The hard drives, well, they look the same. If you go to the network adapter, you're going to see the small change here of advanced feature, because now you have what's called device naming, which is here. You have the integration services. They have the default name, which is the same. And the checkpoints has been changed into real checkpoints. I have been running this version for a long period of time since I'm a member, part of the TAP program. with the small things I showed you as issues, everything else has been working pretty darn straightforward. Does it mean you should put this in production? No, you shouldn't. But it's time to start playing with it, and it's time to play with all the PowerShell commandlets. With that said, my 60 minutes is up. Any questions?
Yes.
Shoot.
You could now do changes to the memory settings while the virtual machine was running. Is there any, will there be any change to the processor so you can change the number of cores of the processor?
So the question is, we can change the memory. Can we do the same with the number of CPUs? And the answer is currently no.
Will it be?
So the question is, will it be? And the answer is, I can't tell you. Currently, it doesn't exist, and even if it will be later on, I couldn't tell you. So I'm sorry. But I haven't seen anything around it, so it was a good question, though. So thank you so much for attending. I'm going to stick around and answer other questions as well. Thank you, and have a great NIC Conf.